You have to act like a creator every day. You have no clue who and what the journey of the person is who's sitting next to you. And I wish that's something my younger self would have understood.
She sent me a bio, but I'm sure it's already outdated because it was last week and she's done a lot of things since then. But in the meantime, Ajanae Dawkins is an interdisciplinary poet, performance artist, and theologian. Through poetry, she archives her matrilineage to explore the politics of faith, grief, and intimacy between Black women. Her work is published or forthcoming in the Academy of American Poets, The Rumpus, Prairie Schooner, and many other places. Her chapbook, Blood Flecks, is the winner of the New Delta Review's 2024 Chapbook Prize. Please wait, because it just keeps going. She is also Urban Art Space's 2024 Community Artist in Residence. I hear that she's just taking over, so I don't know when her reign will be over. Neither do they, which is great. Please give a nice, warm welcome to Ajanae Dawkins.
Three things that I would tell myself as a younger poet. I wasn't asked for three, but I work in three, so I just immediately assumed that it was like going to be three things. And what I would tell myself as a younger poet was immediately a very loaded question, because the older poets did tell me all of the things I would tell myself, and I was just very hard-headed. So no one was gatekeeping the secrets. It just sometimes took a few years for the truth of some of these things to set in. So here we go. Number one, we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. Gwendolyn Brooks. Lesson one is the art and art journey means very little if you do not have people to share it with. People who understand your passions, your loves, your processes, the very peculiar experience of being somebody who makes, who is a creator. You have to have people in your life who understand what that means and who love you for more than the things that you make. In 2019, I went to this retreat called The Watering Hole, which was run, it's an offshoot of Cave Canem South, incredible space for writers, especially writers of color, and Black writers. And Jericho Brown was leading the manuscript workshop. Jericho Brown's an incredible poet. If you're not familiar with him, please get familiar. And I was a part of this manuscript workshop. Sorry. I was a part of this manuscript workshop. Get in there, and there's a little cohort of us who've all brought our little books. This book I've collapsed. It doesn't exist anymore. It was not what I wanted it to be. The new version of it is actually the chapbook that is out now, or that will be out in 2025. But Jericho essentially hits us with a kind of like, look to your left and look to your right, because these are the writers that you're going to be writing with for like the next 50 years. And that was 2019. I was grown, but I was still a very like young version of myself. And so it was hard to understand the magnitude of what that meant. Since then, everybody in that cohort either has a book under contract, has won a major literary award, or has done something like really significant to shift like their career and their field. Since then, people in that cohort, I have been to their book releases. I've been to their weddings. They have designed my website. We see each other at conferences and we wrap our arms around each other. We've written blurbs for each other. It's really hard to articulate how small the poetry world is, especially if you are a black poet or poet of color. And so when I say it is really the worst thing in the world for you not to embrace the community that you are in with active support, and I mean not just, when you see somebody, I mean showing up physically, taking people's work seriously, teaching them as people who are actively contributing to the canon right now because they are. The year after Jericho Brown taught us in that space and told us that he won the Pulitzer. You have no clue who and what the journey of the person is who's sitting next to you. And typically what you find is something that Fatima Ashgar said years ago, is that circles rise together. When you look at what is now, it's still very painful to say, but the late Nikki Giovanni, if you look at photos of her, it's like her and her friends were like Toni Morrison and Sony Sanchez, and like Toni Morrison said that the first person to call her to let her know about her Nobel Peace Prize was Sonia Sanchez, because those are the kinds of relationships that they have. Oprah said one of her mentors was Maya Angelou. So, it is a very lonely idea for me that I would win a major poetry prize and I would not have relationships with people who would be actively invested in my journey. And I think we really underappreciate the value of friendship. So many of the institutions that we are familiar with are literally built on the back of friendship. Cave Canem, if you're... What? Okay, shout out to Cave Canem, one of the most prestigious literary organizations dedicated to Black poetry, was built off the back of Toy Derricotte and Cornelius Eady's friendship, and them reaching out to their friends and saying, hey, we want to run these workshops for Black poets, and let's just see who will show up. So this is just a reminder to be curious about your community, your elders, your peers, the up-and-coming artists, to operate outside of scarcity models, because it is something that will work against you, the belief that only one of you can make it, the belief that there are only enough resources for a handful of you. So that's number one. I'm going to check my time. Number two, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. Audre Lorde. Know yourself, your desires, your ethics, your vision for your life. Obligation and fear are two of the biggest disruptors to our art. Who we feel responsible to, how we feel responsible to them, and then how we feel afraid to be perceived, deeply, deeply impact our art. As a Christian artist, I've felt this intimately. I was at one point a part of a very conservative and restrictive religious space that one of the ways that sometimes religious spaces maintain a semblance of control is by ensuring that you know you are being monitored. And that is something that is very, very difficult on your art, because you cannot create with the perception of who will be upset or who will think the wrong thing about me. And consequently, the art that I made in that season of my life is probably some of the worst art I've ever made. It's art that refused to say the thing plainly. It's art that refused to engage honestly with the truth of what I was interested in, which were things that kind of sat in tension with some of my religious rearing in the space I was in. I wanted to talk about desire. I wanted to talk about sexuality. I wanted to talk about the body. And the work that I have revised since then from that era has predominantly me going back and just saying the thing that I felt like I couldn't say the first time. One of my mentors, Angel Nafis, said that there is no space in poems for secrets. No, let me rephrase. She said there's no space in poems for privacy, only secrets. Meaning, if there's something that you feel like is a private part of your life, then you need to not be writing about it because it's evident to the reader. But there is space for a juicy secret or two. Part of the reason my work was failing at this point in time is because I didn't know myself. I didn't know my desires. I was out of touch with my desires because my desires were what I was told by the church my desires should be. And the desires were off limits. A lot of the desires that I actually felt were off limits by the church. But the issue with that is that if you do not know what you want, you cannot build the life of your dreams. If you do not know what you want, you cannot build the art of your dreams. If you do not know what you want, you will find yourself coveting the success of other people who have gained things that you do not even want, who are living lives that you do not even want. And so knowing yourself and your desires intimately is what allows you to not only dream for yourself, but build work that is centered in your wanting. Lastly, last quote is, unfortunately, I cannot find who said this. I've looked everywhere, but the quote is that you have to act like a creator every day in everything you do. Don't just read, write. Don't just listen, speak. Don't just take, give. The world is built around mindless, endless, self-consuming consumption. You must resist it at all cost, or your life will flash by in a shadow of who you could have been. Take inspiration, but through the lens of output. Once you make the shift, your life changes forever. You finally escape the sky-painted walls you've been trapped inside. Then you make things relentlessly, obsessively, and you wonder how you went so long without realizing that you always could. Wish I knew who said that. But the last thing I would tell my younger self is that there is no right moment or right condition for creating. I spent a long time waiting for the right moment to make something in the way that I thought would be perfect. Once I had studied enough, once I had dreamed enough, once I had enough money, once I was thin enough to look good on camera, once my makeup was done well. And there's no such thing as that. Now sometimes I literally get a line while I'm teaching my students and will pause my entire classroom just so I can write it down, because I know that this is the Spirit feeding me, because I know that I exist in a constant state of being a creator and of working as a creator, and it's changed everything about how I approach my life as an artist. Poetry for me is now a lens more than it is simply a thing I do, meaning my chapbook is coming out and my chapbook is poems. But I was like, wow, these poems are also films. the way that I want my audience to engage with these poems. The advertising campaign that I came up with as a result of the book is also its own creative vision that I have that is centered in the way that I imagine a world around poetry. The way that I build anything is through understanding that there is no limit to the access of like creative energy that I have. And I wish that's something my younger self would have understood. My younger self, I learned about poems through a program called Inside Out Literary Arts Project. I'm going to stop this because this is my last point. But I learned through poems through a project called Inside Out Literary Arts Project. And thankfully, they had me studying poetry in that space. So it was 15, 16, 17 studying sestinas and sonnets and all kinds of things. But my introduction to the world of my engagement with poetry was through slam. And so for a long time, I believed that my career as a poet would exist in a 3-minute and 10-second time frame. And then I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison on a full ride scholarship where they had a big focus on hip-hop theater. And I was like, oh, I could do a whole play of these. And I was like, cool. So I do one-woman shows and slam. And then I got my first residency at an exhibition space. And I was like, I make visual art. And then my husband became a filmmaker and was like, my camera is your camera and my eyes are your eyes and my vision is your vision. And I was like, we make films. And I wish a younger version of me would have thought to imagine a creative life for myself beyond the example of what I had been taught, beyond the forms of what I had been taught, because I would have began experimenting a long time ago. So, in summary, community, knowing yourself, and being a creator in everything. Thank you.